There are places where the dead are supposed to rest, hallowed grounds carved out from the world of the living, where memory is etched in stone and grief is given a final, quiet home. We trust in the sanctity of these places. We believe that rest in peace is a promise. But in the Russian city of Nizhny Novgorod, that promise was broken. For years, a shadow moved among the tombstones, a man not looking to pay his respects but to collect. He wasn't a grave robber in the traditional sense. He wasn't after jewelry or gold. He was after the dead themselves. What he did with them, in the cramped confines of his small apartment, would uncover a story so profoundly strange, so deeply disturbing that it defies easy explanation. This is the story of Anatoly Moskvin, the genius historian, the lonely eccentric, and the man who turned human children into his own private collection of dolls. In the autumn of 2011, Russian police were investigating a string of grave desecrations that had plagued the cemeteries around Nizhny Novgorod. For over a decade, graves, almost exclusively of young girls and women, had been mysteriously unearthed. There was no clear pattern, no discernible motive. It was a phantom crime, leaving behind only disturbed earth and grieving families who had to bury their loved ones a second time. The investigation had stalled for years, a cold case file gathering dust. That is, until a tip, born from a completely unrelated incident, led them to the door of apartment 12 on Lenin Avenue. The apartment belonged to a man named Anatoly Moskvin, and what the police were about to find inside would not only solve the mystery of the empty graves, but would plunge them into a waking nightmare. To understand the horror found in that apartment, you first have to understand the man who lived there. Anatoly Moskvin was, by all public accounts, a brilliant and respected eccentric. Born in 1966, he was a bona fide genius. A philologist by training, he was a polyglot who reportedly spoke 13 languages. He was a celebrated journalist, a respected local historian, and an accomplished academic who had published numerous books and papers. His specialized field of study, however, was a clue hiding in plain sight. Moskvin was a self-proclaimed necropolist, an expert on cemeteries. He spent decades of his life meticulously documenting every single cemetery in the Nizhny Novgorod region, over 750 of them. He would walk for miles, sleeping in haystacks or abandoned farmhouses just to find a forgotten gravestone. He claimed to have personally documented the history of over 900 cemeteries across Russia. His magnum opus was a series of books and articles titled Great Walks Around Cemeteries and What the Dead Said. He was the authority on the subject. Local newspapers consulted him for historical articles. Universities invited him to lecture. He was the quirky, harmless academic, the man who knew more about the city's dead than anyone alive. But there was another side to Moskvin, one he kept hidden behind the stacks of books and the intellectual accolades. His fascination with the dead wasn't purely academic. It was an obsession that began in childhood. He recounted a story from when he was 13 years old. He said he was stopped by a funeral procession for an 11-year-old girl named Natasha Petrova. The mourners, adhering to a strange local custom, forced the young Anatoly to kiss the corpse of the girl on the forehead. He later claimed this experience sparked a paranormal romantic connection with the dead girl, a profound and disturbing catalyst for his life's work. This wasn't just a quirky interest. It was a deep-seated spiritual belief system he had constructed for himself. Moskvin blended paganism, occult beliefs, and his own bizarre interpretations of science. He believed that the dead could be brought back to life. He spoke of black magic and ancient rituals. He told people he could communicate with the spirits of the departed, that they would speak to him as he walked among their graves. He even claimed to have spent a night sleeping in a coffin ahead of a deceased person's funeral, just to feel closer to the experience. His neighbors thought he was odd. They saw him wandering the streets at all hours, dressed in strange, dark clothing. His parents, Elvira and Yuri, with whom he shared the small apartment, simply saw him as their brilliant, reclusive son, lost in his world of books and history. They had no idea what he was doing in his room. They had no idea who he was bringing home. November 2nd, 2011. Armed with a search warrant, police entered the Moskvin family apartment. The scene that greeted them was one of overwhelming clutter. Books, papers, clothes, and trinkets were piled floor to ceiling. It was the cramped, chaotic space of a lifelong hoarder. His elderly parents sat in the living room, confused and frightened. The police moved towards Anatoly's bedroom, the source of a faint, sweet, and sickly smell. Inside, the chaos was even more intense. But amidst the squalor, there were figures. Seated on shelves, propped up on the bed, perched on chairs, were dozens of life-sized dolls. At first glance, it was just a strange, creepy collection. The dolls were large, some the size of a full-grown child. They were dressed in colorful stockings, dresses, and knee-high boots. Some wore makeup, their faces painted with vacant expressions. Others had blonde wigs. One was dressed as a teddy bear. It was a grotesque tea party frozen in time. An officer, perhaps on a hunch or simply trying to clear a path, bumped into one of the figures. It was surprisingly heavy. He touched its face. It wasn't plastic, it wasn't porcelain. It was cold, dry, and strangely leathery to the touch. The horrifying realization dawned on the seasoned officers in a wave of disbelief and nausea. These were not dolls. They were the mummified bodies of human children. The police had stumbled upon Anatoly Moskvin's secret collection. 29 bodies, all young girls aged between 3 and 12 years old. He had meticulously dug them up from their graves over a period of 10 years. He brought them home, one by one, to his small apartment where his parents slept just one room away, completely oblivious. The details of his process were as methodical as they were monstrous. After exhuming a body, he would take it back to his apartment and begin the mummification process. He used a simple but effective solution of salt and baking soda to dry out the corpses, packing the mixture inside the body cavities and wrapping the bodies in cloth. This process would take months. He would then stuff the desiccated remains with rags and cloth to give them form. For the faces, he would stretch nylon stockings over the skulls, sometimes covering them with a layer of wax to create a smoother, more doll-like surface. He would embed buttons or toy eyes into the sockets. He would paint their lips and nails. This wasn't just preservation. It was a twisted act of creation. He gave each of his dolls a name. He would sit them down to watch cartoons with him. He held birthday parties for them, dressing them in special outfits and singing them songs. He even inserted music boxes or voice recorders into their chest cavities so when he touched them they would play a child's song or speak a phrase. He told police he loved them, that they were his children. He claimed he was waiting for science or black magic to advance to a point where he could bring them back to life. In his profoundly warped mind, he wasn't desecrating graves. He was rescuing these girls from the cold, lonely earth. He was giving them a home, a life, until they could be made whole again. His parents later told police that they thought the dolls were just a strange hobby, large, elaborate puppets their son had made. They never suspected the truth. They never looked too closely. The arrest of Anatoly Moskvin sent shockwaves through Russia and beyond. The quiet, bookish historian was now the lord of the mummies, the doll maker. As investigators delved deeper, the full scope of his obsession became clear. Inside his apartment and garage, they found detailed instructions on mummification he'd printed from the internet. They found maps of the cemeteries he targeted with specific graves circled. They found photographs and videos he had taken of the corpses. They also found the clothing and personal effects of the girls which he had taken from their coffins. Most chillingly, they found a handwritten list, a catalog of his victims detailing their lives and deaths. He cooperated fully with the police, though without a hint of remorse. He explained his actions with a chilling academic detachment. He told them he had a specific set of criteria for choosing his victims. He said the spirits of the dead children would speak to him, begging him to take them home. He would perform small rituals at their gravesides. If he felt a connection, if he felt they were calling to him, he would return at night with a shovel. He insisted he only took children who he felt had died unjustly, taken from the world too soon. He saw himself as their savior. His own words reveal a mind operating on a completely different plane of reality. He once wrote, "I don't think anyone could understand my motives without having had a similar experience from childhood." He told a journalist, "These girls are girls. They have no bodies. I make dolls out of them." He complained that the police had paraded his children naked in front of cameras, showing no respect for them. He never referred to them as corpses or bodies, only as his dolls, his girls. Psychiatric evaluations were unsurprisingly complex. Moskvin was not your typical serial killer. He hadn't murdered anyone. His crime was against the dead and against the sanctity of memory. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia with a schizotypal personality disorder. The court deemed him mentally unfit to stand trial. He wasn't a criminal in the eyes of the law, but a patient. He was sentenced not to prison, but to compulsory psychiatric treatment in a secure facility. The public was outraged. To the families of his victims, this wasn't justice. It was a technicality that allowed a monster to escape true punishment. Behind the lurid headlines and the psychological analyses lies the real human cost of Anatoly Moskvin's actions. For every doll in his apartment, there was a family already crushed by the loss of a child, who were forced to endure a second, unimaginable trauma. Take the story of Natalia Chardimova, the mother of 10-year-old Olga, who had died in a tragic accident. For years, Natalia had visited her daughter's grave, finding comfort in the quiet ritual. But she had always felt something was wrong. She would find small, strange trinkets left on the gravestone, a piece of candy, a small toy. She thought it was a kind stranger. Once, she found a note addressed to little Olga, wishing her a happy holiday. The note was signed with a man's name. It was unsettling, but she could never have imagined the truth. After Moskvin's arrest, police had the horrific task of identifying the 29 bodies. They used his own meticulous records and the clothes he had kept. Then they had to call the parents. Imagine that phone call. The police telling you that your child, who you buried years ago, had been stolen from their final resting place and turned into a grotesque plaything in a stranger's apartment. Natalia Chardimova learned that her daughter Olga was one of Moskvin's dolls. The note writer, the kind stranger, was the man who had desecrated her grave. She had to identify her child's dress from a police evidence bag. Then for a second time, she had to hold a funeral for her daughter. The grief was reignited, compounded by a horror for which there are no words. She and dozens of other parents were forced to rebury their children, this time in graves sealed with concrete, to ensure they would never be disturbed again. Moskvin, from his hospital ward, has shown no empathy for their pain. In letters and interviews, he has expressed anger that the girls were taken from him. He even tried to sue the authorities to get his collection back. He once told a reporter that the parents had abandoned their girls in the cold and that he had given them warmth. This complete detachment from the suffering he caused is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of his psyche. For the families, there is no closure. The man who violated their children in the most profound way imaginable is not in prison, but in a hospital, receiving treatment. They live with the knowledge that he could one day petition for his release. The case of Anatoly Moskvin leaves us adrift in a sea of unanswered questions. How could a man of such intellect, a respected historian and linguist, be so profoundly disconnected from reality? Was his genius intertwined with his madness, or did one consume the other? His academic work on cemeteries was real and valuable. He wasn't faking his intelligence. He was, in one part of his life, a genuine scholar. Yet in the secret confines of his room, he was tending to a garden of the dead. And what of his parents? How could they live in such a small apartment and not know? The smell alone should have been overpowering. Did they suspect and choose to ignore it? Or was their denial so powerful that it blinded them to the horror under their own roof? In interviews, his mother Elvira has been defensive, portraying Anatoly as a misunderstood genius and herself as a victim. It's a question that haunts the case. Was it a failure of awareness, or a willful ignorance born of a desperate parental love? The case also forces us to confront our own relationship with death and grief. Moskvin's actions were a violation of our most sacred taboos. The desecration of a grave, especially a child's grave, feels like an attack on the very fabric of society. He shattered the peace of the dead and the living alike. Today, Anatoly Moskvin remains confined to a psychiatric clinic. Every 6 months, a court reviews his case to decide if he is fit for release. Every 6 months, the families of his victims are forced to relive their nightmare, protesting and praying that he remains locked away. Doctors have stated that his condition is severe and that he remains a danger. Moskvin, for his part, has refused to apologize to the parents. He has set conditions for any potential apology, demanding that the families legally recognize him as a foster parent to their deceased children. He still believes he did nothing wrong. The story of Anatoly Moskvin is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a descent into the labyrinth of a shattered human mind, a place where love and obsession, genius and madness, life and death all blur into one grotesque tapestry. In his world, the cemetery wasn't an ending. It was a library, a playground, a shopping mall. And in a small, cluttered apartment in the heart of Russia, he tried to build a family from its stolen books. The Russian dolls he created were not made of wood, but of bone and preserved flesh, each one a testament to a grief he tried to conquer and a horror he unleashed upon the world. They sit now, not in his room, but in the cold evidence lockers of a police station, silent witnesses to a story that will forever haunt the quiet cemeteries of Nizhny Novgorod.